We have lights. So I see we have quorum. I call this September 17th meeting of Policy and Priorities to order. First item of business is the adoption of the agenda. It has been moved by Councillor Kersey that the agenda for the September 17th, 2018 regular meeting of committee be adopted. Any amendments, changes, comments? Call the question. All in favor? Passed. Circulated. Second item is a disclosure of pecuniary interest. Conflicts of interest? None?
None, Mr. Chair.
None indicated? I haven't either. So under number 4, new business, 4.1, with regard to the MCC Hospitality Advisory Committee, proposed terms of reference. It's moved by Councillor Kersey that committee recommend that.
It's Councillor Durley.
My apologies. Councillor Durley, that committee recommend the council approve the Meridian Community Centre Hospitality Advisory Committee terms of reference. So, Councillor Durley, do you want to speak to this, and then we can?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I originally seconded Councillor Kersey's motion, notice of motion, rather, and I think this past weekend was a clear example of how hospitality is a very vital portion, a very vital part of our operating of the MCC, and I think that all of the input that is in this terms of reference, having some experts on the assisting side, the advisory side, as well as having staff from recreation and facilities, and all these groups together, I think putting some great minds together will certainly give us some great results. The staff, as mentioned before, handled it magnificently. It was just a fantastic job. There was beverages, and there was food, there was all kind of activities, everything going on. So I think it's a compliment to our staff, but it certainly would be helpful to have some advisory people who are experts in there to give us a few hints as to how to make it a little easier, because I know by the end of the weekend our staff was pretty well ready to collapse because they had worked so hard. So they deserved the credit for that, and I fully support the terms of reference for this. And I think the sooner we get together to get this committee together, the better it's going to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Durley. Questions, comments? Councillor Kersey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to Councillor Durley for addressing the reason for the committee. My comments are, firstly, a couple of wordsmithing things under the how might we section. Bullet 4, staff and experts in field of hospitality to develop programs. I think it should be something like, how might we engage staff and experts in the field of hospitality? The English just isn't quite clear there. And also on bullets 5, 6, 7, and 8, the 2 should be dropped, and the capitalize of the next words. That would then read from the how might we in a better way, I think. Okay. The real issue that I would like to discuss, well, 2 issues. Number 1, under membership, I'm wondering whether we should have a member of corporate services sit on that committee in an ex officio way, or be identified as a resource. I don't know how the CAO would feel about that. I think this committee will be making monetary recommendations back to council, so it might not hurt to have an interface with corporate services in there.
Is that a question to the CEO? Mr. CEO?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, it's council's discretion. In drafting these, I thought that the most involved elements were membership, and that other elements that are needed as resource will be called in as needed. So if you wanted to put somebody from corporate services on as a member, that's up to council. I would suggest that they're, like any other part of the organization, they're available to be called upon for their expertise and to provide input, but not necessarily a sitting member of the committee. But again, that's up to council.
I'm satisfied with that as long as they could be used as a resource. I think from time to time, they'll probably be needed to be brought in.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I think it's similar to the Oversight Committee where there was a number of staff that were regularly a part of meetings that weren't on the committee but were resources and that were called upon to provide that expertise in those particular areas. And I see the same situation for this one as well.
Perfect.
Thank you. CO. Councillor Kersey, any
I
further?
have one more point, Mr. Chair, if I may. In the membership, we talk about that the members of this committee, as is our standard form of setting up advisory committees, they run typically with the term of council. But we're in a kind of an awkward spot here, and I'd like to see the committee struck as soon as possible, possibly before a new council would be sworn in. So is there a way that we can include wording there that would cover that eventuality? Because it could happen, we go through all the effort, strike the committee, and then their term of office is over within a matter of a month or two. I don't know what the thoughts of my fellow council is.
Councillor Pat?
Well, it's not a thought. I thought it's a policy that I'm part of a lot of advisory committees. They come to an end. Then you have to reappoint them, and I would turn to the clerk. And, no offense, it's just,
No,
I know
no
where you're going
offense
with this,
taken.
but the bottom line is that this would be facilitated, am I wrong through you, Mr. Chair, and Madam Clerk, as part of our, appointment to new advisory committees. Everyone those that are involved, those of you know, their terms come to an end. We start all over.
That's right.
Am I wrong? Madam Clerk?
Through you, Mr. Chair, our committees are all appointed for the term of council. They're reappointed by bylaw at the beginning of a new term. We broadcast, we always tell members of committees that they're welcome to reapply because there is no limit to their term. But they are struck for the term of council, save and except the Committee of Adjustment under the Planning Act. They are appointed for their term of council or until their successors are appointed to ensure the work of the planning applications continues.
Councillor Kersey?
I take my friend's point, but I guess the point that I'm trying to get to is we're just no sooner going to get this committee up and operational that it could come to an end. So is there anything in our procedure bylaw or the municipal act which would preclude us from appointing members for a longer period than the remaining 2 or 3 months of our term?
Clear question, I think, Councillor Kersey. Madam Clerk, do you have an answer to that? Are we able to nominate a committee now that would go past the end of the term?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would need to investigate that a little bit further. We still need to advertise for committee members. It's going to be a process even to get that, so
Right.
to do that at this point in the election period is already going to be a challenge to recruit members of the committee, to make recommendations and to make the appointments. But to appoint outside of the council term, I would want a little bit of time just to research that.
Well, I'd be
Councilor Christie?
interested, Mr. Chair, to hear what the other members of committee might think about this point.
And as am I. Are there other comments? Councillor Durden?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think the only challenge here would be the councillor ex officio person, because the others would have the opportunity to reapply for the next term, but it could be that if you or I were on this committee and were not reelected, then obviously someone else would have to take that position. So I think that would be the point of contention. However, if there is a group of people out there who are interested now, I'm sure they would be interested in the next term as well, and they would reapply. So taking the clerk's advice here that that being the procedure, I think it would flow smoothly. The only hitch would be the ex officio town councillor who may or may not be back.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor?
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. I thought this was going to start in the new term. And, by the time this gets to us on October 1st, you're into, what are you going to appoint, November 1st? And then, so that's what I thought. In terms of other elements for the policy or for the terms of reference. I wondered if there should be a paragraph in the section here about meeting protocols, especially with a group that we're gonna try and get some folks that have expertise in the industry, that there's something clear there about conflicts of interest should be noted by members, because they may be in a conflict. They may be working for somebody that's doing, I don't know, whatever, so you never know. But I think it's just adding a little bullet there about conflicts of interest at every meeting shall be noted, something like that. I think that would be important. I guess my question to the CAO that put them together, are these, I know that counselors have suggested at various times that the hope for this, for elements of this facility might be a, what I might call a one-stop shop. So somebody calls up and says, hey, I want to do a shower, a bridal shower, or whatever. Can you recommend a caterer? Can you recommend a photographer? Whatever it is that folks want to use one of the rooms for. So are these terms of reference broad enough to accommodate that this committee would essentially kind of oversee that? So I'm asking the CAO, does he see it as these are following within the purview of the committee?
Mr. CEO?
Just maybe to clarify through you, Mr. Chair, the last comment about its reporting.
No, just are the terms of reference broad enough to achieve that? Is that what, when it says here, for instance, to investigate and recommend opportunities for development of hospitality services for events such as weddings, celebrations, community events, private functions, et cetera, is that what the idea is? Somebody would come in and they could say, hey, I love your facility, how do I rent it? Somebody could, here's the form, here it is, and the hospitality committee have had input into how that's designed. Is that essentially what the goal is?
That's my understanding of what the intent of it was from council, so I would defer to the, I know I drafted them, but I was, yeah.
Yeah, my question is, do you think the terms of reference are broad enough to deal with that?
Yes, I do, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I think they're broad enough, and I think that the questions that you're suggesting are questions that have already been raised by staff and are being contemplated. Having that extra advice from the industry professionals would certainly strengthen our thinking and make it an overall a better product. So, I mean, those are all questions that we're trying to answer now, and I think that having advice on how to best deal with it is what the intent of the committee is, and that's what I understood its function was.
Okay, thank you. And I note, well, I guess the other question that comes to mind is, okay, so there's things mentioned here. It says all arts and cultural events, conferences, sporting events, etc., question mark, trade shows. Somebody on the weekend at one of the events said, you know what, we used to do a lot of concerts. You get a big name Canadian performer come in. They used to do it in another local arena. They love the facility. They want to do it here. So would the hospitality group, would they be ready for that? Would they be prepared for that? Would we be providing input into that? Or is that not something that's in the purview?
So, where do we direct that question?
I guess the CEO.
My understanding is, through you, Mr. Chair, my understanding is that would all be contemplated on using this committee.
Okay. Well, that's good to know.
Councillor Durley, and then I want to make some comments.
Just a comment to that. We did that this weekend without the committee. Like that actually happened. Friday night was an extravaganza type thing, and that's equal to any concert that I've ever been at. So, I think that and the support of an advisory committee here would just strengthen that. There's no question about that. So, I think that may be a redundant question. In fact, yes, we do have the facility, and yes, we have the ability. So, and we've proven that. The staff has done an excellent job in proving that very point. So,
Okay, thank you. Final comment, Mr. Chair, is that I'm pleased that it also includes one member representing the service clubs. I know that they are dreaming and visioning how to use the facility. When some of the service clubs were on tour of the facility during the construction, they were saying to me, Mr. Freeland was one of them, the things we can do here, the things we want to do here. You know, it's not just the home show or the craft show that may want to move here. I understand that they're thinking of bringing all the service clubs together to organize something large. So I'm very pleased that somebody from the service club is going to be here and hopefully can be that liaison with the other service clubs so that that input will be provided. So appreciate the clarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilor Durley?
Through Mr. Chair, something not related to what we're talking about, but I was asked just recently, does a member of this committee need to be a resident of the town of Pelham? Because there is, I've been notified that there is a person interested who is not a resident of the town of Pelham, but who has expertise in this area, actually has taught hospitality in schools of higher learning. So I ask if the composition, do you need to be a resident of Pelham in order to be part of this, or could it be an expert who does not actually reside in Pelham?
Thank you. I'm told that the clerk has the answer to that question,
But the CAO doesn't, one or the other.
because the CAO doesn't.
For you, Mr. Chair, all of the applications for our advisory committees do require that they be town of Pelham residents, 18 years of old, except for the Mayor's Youth Advisory Committee, essentially eligible voters. So if council were to so direct for this committee, that would be council's will.
Okay, well, that answers that question. Councilor, does that satisfy you for the second moment? I want to make some comments before this round is done.
Yeah, so it is a possibility that someone not a resident of Pelham could be there if in fact there was some concessions made by council? Or might-
It would have to be made by council. We'd have to do
Time
something.
of appointment,
At
yeah.
the time of appointment. Okay, thank you.
Which is interesting, because of course, I think what's contemplated in the terms of reference is that the participants in that committee will be qualified in some way that possibly a resident of Pelham is not, by virtue of the occupation they have or the experience that they've had. So it raises an interesting question that may have to be dealt with.
If something like that could be maybe an appendix to the terms of reference, that would be appreciated, so it says that the opportunity is there, and that person may not want to apply. However, if someone does, we would like to have just an escape hatch where we could consider that. Thank you.
Looking at prioritizing qualification as opposed to residence.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, I'm just looking up the appointment policy, so while you ask your questions, I'll continue to look.
Okay, so our clerk is going to be doing some research. So I have some comments, and I'm going to direct them to Councillor Durley, because he made the motion, but obviously he may not be the only one answering. When I read through the terms of reference and tried to understand the purpose of this committee, I asked myself whether it was best that this be in the nature of an ongoing advisory committee, like what we saw earlier today around active transportation. An ongoing committee that looks at practices at the MCC around hospitality on a continuous basis, or are we really looking for an ad hoc committee meant to provide a recommendation to council regarding how MCC makes its offering around hospitality for use by the town, by the MCC going forward? It strikes me that this is probably more in the nature of an ad hoc committee, a group of people who get together, examine the question, provide a recommendation, and that recommendation is how, a good model against which the town could match how it goes around the business of providing hospitality on a go-forward basis. I can see a need to examine that from time to time, and maybe you can call that committee back together, but it just struck me as odd that we would have terms of reference that suggest that this is an ongoing advisory committee meeting monthly or more often, or quarterly, whatever it is, looking at how things are being done and kind of providing a level of oversight and management that actually might not be appropriate for what it is we're asking to be done. If the recommendation, for example, is that staff make that provision, that staff provide hospitality themselves, then we're into a supervisory management situation that I think we have to think about. If the recommendation is contracted out, then maybe that can be examined from time to time to see how it's working. So I guess what I'm looking for is some clarity, yeah, that might give me some comfort that in fact that it's a continuously existing and operating advisory committee as opposed to being simply a one-off ad hoc committee dealing with a particular recommendation. Councillor King, you?
Through you, Mr. Chair, unless I misunderstood our conversation at a previous meeting, I thought that this advisory committee was exactly that, an ad hoc committee that would be established initially, and depending on the outcome of the advice to council, it may need to be an ongoing committee. But my understanding right from the start was that it was an ad hoc committee. That being the case, in both, and I realize we're not at the user group committee yet, but I'm looking at both committees and thinking that initially they could both be ad hoc committees, which means that they could be established now in this term of council with a review when committees are reassembled for the new term of council.
Thank you. But in your view, when you considered this issue at the outset, did you think that this was meant to be an ongoing exercise for a lengthy period to come, or did you see it as a committee that would pull experts together to provide the town with a recommendation as to how to proceed?
The latter.
The latter. As did I. So I wonder who might address that. Councillor Kersey, I know you had a hand in drafting this.
Yeah, I think maybe we're just arguing over terms, but in fact, initially, this committee may have a lot of work to do. They're going to help to develop the checklists of things that you provide to people who approach for a turnkey operation. They're going to help source various caterers. They might help us with the management of our alcohol and beverage service, all of those sort of things. So there'll be, the amount of work will be higher at the beginning, similar to starting any new business. You know, the first year is going to be probably the challenge year. But like any other industry, the hospitality industry is in a constant state of flux. So you need to, I think, whether it changes from a monthly meeting to a quarterly meeting or what have you, I think still having that access to that expertise will be helpful, particularly during the next 3 or 4 years as that facility comes on board and all of the approaches that we are taking get ironed out. But as I say, that industry is in a constant state of flux. So I think it will be beneficial to have them as an advisory committee. And it may come down the road that the advisory committee comes to us and says, listen, we've hit all the dots, everything is in place, it's running smoothly, you don't need us anymore. We'll come back if and when you require it. So that's sort of what I'm thinking, that during the initial period, there'll be lots of work. As we phase it in and roll it out, we'll still need somebody there to assist us in the evaluation process. How's it coming? Bringing a report back to council, et cetera, et cetera. It's not there to hinder staff, it's there to help staff, and it's to help to make the facility as efficient and effective as possible in this particular sector of operations.
Thank you. Would you consider it perhaps the legitimate function of an ad hoc committee to make that recommendation if it felt that that was a necessary part of the ongoing management of the MCC? You're articulating a vision of a fair amount of involvement by this group, but this group may or may not have a view that that kind of involvement is actually necessary. They may recommend do this and call us back in a year.
It may, in fact.
Okay, so the nature of this committee as an ad hoc committee shouldn't be discounted. It may just be an ad hoc committee, but it may recommend something that's on an ongoing basis.
I think Councillor Gurley would probably
Yeah.
support me on that.
Yes, I think the work of this committee will be heavy in the front end. obviously, because this is where staff could use some advice. By virtue of being an advisory committee, they're not there to manage or supervise anything. They're just there to give advice to help our staff get their job done more effectively, easier, and with a couple of shortcuts likely, and certainly that is what's there. And I have to agree with Councillor Kersey, the hospitality business is evolving daily. So there may be some new things coming on board that can be a hint to staff to say, watch for this because it's coming up, and that could certainly help us. Could it be monthly, quarterly, semi-annually? Yes, by all means. And these people, being the experts that they are, certainly will recommend their own time limits, because our staff, by what they did last weekend, proved that they know what's going on. It's just that now they can get some shortcuts and some hints as to how to do it easier. This is, I think, the whole idea behind all this. Besides that, it's a revenue source for the town, and I think it's very important that we make maximum benefit of that. So that, that's to me the whole issue behind the committee. And can it be ad hoc? By all means. In fact, if they determine we've done all we can for you, thank you very much for your help, and come back to our next event.
Thank you. And I think Councillor Pat, are you indicating that?
I tend to, along your side, it's an ad hoc / oversight strategic advisement group that's there to do a number of functions besides the specifics. The hospitality industry also has hospitality dedicated staff who are trained, who know how to do all this and put it all together. They would in fact do a number of critical functions and critical elements to help our staff, in fact, if it is our staff, or if you want to call it ad hoc, or not ad hoc, but alternative resources to do the things we need to achieve. So I can see it having a time limit and sort of a target of what you would, with all respect, is what specifically do you want them to do? And I don't want to but there's some things they have to do, some policies on how we're going to govern the front end customers coming in and asking us, and I'm not being, I guess I'm trying to be as simple about it as possible. What exactly do you, forgive me, offer in the community center? So you should be able to list that these are all the functions that you should be able to do, right? These are things we can do, these are the things we can't do. And here's how we're going to help you. Here's the mechanisms, here's who's going to be taking the lead on it, here's how, I'm just drawing on past experience, and this is either one or two people that'll help you get to that point. And if that's embedded there, then I don't think we need an advisory committee. You could pretty well do this with ad hoc, or your oversight committee did that to that extent.
Yeah.
Basically, that's basically what they did. So, but I just, can see this having a time-limited, very targeted, very specific type of function. Strictly with hospitality.
Thank you, Councillor Pat. Councillor Kersey?
Well, I think, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Papp's point, the how might we section defines what we want them to accomplish. So whether we call this an ad hoc committee or an advisory
Right.
committee, to me, it means absolutely nothing. We're arguing over words. Call it an ad hoc advisory committee if it makes you feel better, but the point of it is.
Point of order.
No,
Don't.
I'm not saying it to you personally.
No, but point of
Councillor.
order.
Councillor Kersey, please, there's a point of order.
No intended of trying to discredit this.
No.
I was offering you some very positive advice, so.
Thank you, Councillor Papp. I think it was actually accepted as positive advice, but I think that Councillor Kersey wants to finish his point, and then.
Okay, then we'll have another, I'll offer something.
Councillor Papp, if my comments offended you, they were not meant to offend you. The point that I was trying to make was the important part is encased in the body of this document. We want them to do a specific function. We want them to
Right.
assist our staff to get the MCC operating in the most efficient and effective manner so that we can maximize the monies that are generated when events are held in that facility. If you feel that can be done with an ad hoc committee with an undefined time frame,
Yeah?
then I'm perfectly happy with that. So if that's the issue, that's fine. it doesn't matter to me, because then the ad hoc committee can come back to us and say, we're done, our work is done. Thank you.
So what I'm hearing, Councillor Kersey, and I think that it's something that I can well get behind, is that it's the committee itself with its expertise will create its recommendation and will determine in the advice that it gives the town whether it ought to continue or not continue, whether it's necessary or not necessary. If it has that freedom, then I'm happy with it. What would concern me is that our expectation from the outset, based on the terms of reference, is that this be an ongoing committee that meets and meets and meets and meets without, even after it has done its work around putting forward a recommendation. And its recommendation may be that it requires something going on, but I'd like to hear from the experts at that point. So, but I think we're in a place where we can both support
Right.
a position like that. So I appreciate that. Are there any other comments? Oh, and the clerk indicates that she has found the bylaw reference with regard to participation in advisory committees.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we do have a policy, it's policy P20108, public appointment policy governing citizen appointments to agencies, boards, committees, and external bodies. It does indicate that we would be selecting from Pelham residents to provide a high caliber direction to Pelham's volunteer agencies, boards, committees, and to the town. And also that the term be, a set term be established for each agency, committee, or board, being the 4 years coincident with the term of council that appoints the members or until a successor is appointed. So it does have the statement in there, or until a successor is appointed,
Right.
in the policy.
So question to the clerk, if in fact what we needed on a particular advisory committee was specific expertise that was not made available to us from among residents, but we still needed that expertise, could we go outside the, perhaps they wouldn't be voting members or something?
We could.
Perhaps they could be advisors, but the policy does state Pelham residents.
Yeah, so advisors perhaps, something to act. Good. Any other comments? So my question to the CAO, I guess, is my question to the CAO is, given the discussion that you've heard, particularly around whether this is meant to be an ongoing committee or not, are the terms of reference as they're suggested here still capable of supporting the concepts as we've discussed them?
I believe they are, Mr. Chair.
Okay, good enough. Any further discussion with regard to this? We are going to, I guess the motion is to recommend the council approves the Meridian Community Center Hospitality Advisory Committee terms of reference. So if we're happy with the terms of reference, any other comments?
There were some amendments.
There were some amendments.
There were some amendments. So it would
As
need to
amended.
say as amended.
As
yeah.
amended. Call the question. Councillor Kersey, then Councillor Pat.
I may be dense, but I'm a little bit confused here. So, in here with membership, we're defining that they will run for the term of council. It specifically says that. And yet the discussion around here was not that it would be that defined. So are we amending that clause, or are we adopting it the way it's written?
Mr. CEO?
Mr. Chair, just for information of council, this section of the terms of reference is the exact same as all of the other council committees. So all I did was, in the key facts part of that, this is consistent with all other council committees. If council wishes to amend or change that, that's fine, just so they know that's how this was arrived at. So it would be
Right.
consistent with every other committee.
No, I think we recognize that it was the same as all the others, which gave rise to my question. What if it's done its work and it no longer is required, having made its recommendation? Is it our expectation that they would continue? Do we need to make an amendment that says, until they've made a recommendation, and to continue thereafter, if that's the recommendation, I suppose? Or to bring back, that if the recommendation is that an ongoing advisory committee be established, then that would be part of what they recommend. We need help with this. Maybe we need to let it simmer some more. The CEO, is there any way we can meet that need? Or shall we,
I don't see a problem with this being an advisory committee that's in place for 4 years and is called upon as needed, like all the other advisory committees. I don't see an operational issue with that.
the advisory committee, for example, that we heard from earlier meets continuously or regularly.
So does the seniors group.
So does the seniors, right? So do several others. And that was my question from the outset. Do we see this as needing to meet on that kind of regular basis? The terms of reference suggest that they would, and I'm suggesting that it is possible that this committee get together, it makes its recommendation, and its recommendation is, here's the blueprint, carry it out, we're done.
I think the response to that would be let the committee figure that, appoint the committee, let them figure out,
Exactly.
and then if they want to change the terms of reference, they can make that recommendation to council at that time.
Good. Excellent. Mr. Mayor?
I was just gonna recommend that,
Okay.
that the committee, sometimes when you set up a committee, and I was thinking about the oversight committee, they came back with some revisions to the terms of reference to better reflect their duties. The Mayor's Youth Advisory Committee has, Mayor's Youth Advisory Committee has that in their constitution. So that could be added periodically. You could just put that in. Periodically, the committee could come back with revisions to this terms of reference or recommendations to council on revisions of the terms of reference.
And that would go in as an amendment?
Yeah, you could add it in there, and then the committee members could know that that would be within their purview. It might be a good way to deal with it, right?
Councilor Lane?
Yeah, well, I have to agree, thank you, is that the committee will know when they're finished. They'll know when they have to meet, and they'll know when their mandate is finished, and whether it's 1 year, 2 years, who knows how long it might be. I don't think we should tie their hands by saying, okay, you will meet this long, or you'll go this long. Let them decide, we'll see how successful it is.
Or tie their hands by saying you have to meet throughout the entire term?
No, you don't have to.
Okay.
And if I might, you think of the Downtown Beautification Committee, the terms of reference was approved. They came back a couple of months later and said, we'd like to amend the terms of reference. And then they came back to us, and so they said they wanted to change it after that, and we're done, sort of thing, so.
Okay. So that freedom exists within the terms of reference as they're drafted. So, calling the question, anything further? Councillor Papp?
Quickly, I don't mean to belabor this, but we have other community centers surrounding our area in Niagara that are municipally owned and operated. Do we know how can we get some best practices from them and how they set up the organizational, or is that something, I'm thinking specifically the Meridian Center, the Lincoln Community Center?
That would be what the committee
So
would
if
do,
they
is
see
it?
that as part of their role, that would be very worthwhile to figure out how we streamline. So,
Yep, I think that makes sense.
I was just trying to find it, and I thought I sent it to both the mover and the seconder of the original motion. The City of St. Catharines just established a similar committee
right.
for, I thought it was for the First Ontario Performing Arts Center to oversee that. It wasn't necessarily a hospitality committee. I was looking for it, and I
First
couldn't find
Ontario.
it here. But it was for that facility, not for the Meridian Center, I don't think.
So you're right, it's First Ontario.
And they're about 20 years in operation there, 2 or 3 years in operation, and they're establishing it and finding that they need to do so. So I think other municipalities have found that they need to do that. So I think that's why council approved it. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. So
That's fine.
I know that my questions have been answered. Any others? So calling the question on the terms of reference, the committee recommend the council approve the Meridian Community Center Hospitality Advisory Committee terms of reference as amended. All in favor? Passed. Thank you. Thank you. 4.2, MCC User Group Roundtable. This one?
Should just say user group.
Instead of roundtable.
User group roundtable
User
committee.
group, yeah. Okay, moved by Councillor King that committee recommend that council approve the Meridian Community Center User Group Roundtable committee terms of reference. Councillor King, you made the motion. Do you want to speak to it?
In many ways, I see this committee no different as the Hospitality Advisory Committee, other than the fact that it is made up of the people that use the facility. So you're in a great position to be able to feed back improvements, adjustments that need to be made within the center itself, whether it's a staffing issue, it's a maintenance issue, it doesn't matter. I see this as a very, very beneficial group to the ongoing activities of that center.
Thank you. Others? Councillor Lane?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I agree with Councillor King on this one. On this one, I think that some of the same things apply, but I believe that based on what's going to happen with this user groups, and as the facility gets filled with repeat customers or clients or whatever, users over and over and over again, that this particular committee or whatever will become redundant very quickly. I see this as being something that can happen, that the groups will get their time, things will happen, and things will flow nicely. Okay, there was obviously going to be some conflicts because, you know, let's say, for example, the hockey season ends early or the hockey season goes later because of playoffs, but those are little hiccups that this group can deal with. But I can see that once things settle in and all the groups settle in at their time, I can see this as being something that won't be needed for a long duration of time, in my opinion.
Thank you. Councillor Kersey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to speak to Councillor Lane's issue first. I totally disagree with him on that. I think these are volunteer groups. Their operations leaders, their boards of directors change regularly in some cases. There will always be issues that will need to be discussed at the table with all of the users in that facility so that they have an understanding of what events have you got coming up, you know, what's the demands on parking, what are the demands on the facilities, what are demands for the hospitality side. All of those things can be discussed and ironed out at the table so that maybe you don't book a basketball tournament on the same weekend that you have a lacrosse tournament. So I think there'll be an ongoing dialogue that will be necessary to make for the smooth operations. From time to time, there may be conflicts between, let's take the ice users, maybe Pelham Minor Hockey will have something that's bugging them about the Admirals or about the Junior Bs. The place to discuss that is at the table. And you have an open dialogue with staff present from both the facilities and the rec side so that those things can all be worked out. So I see this committee more as an ongoing day-to-day committee than even the hospitality side of it. Pelham used to have a sports council that operated for quite a number of years to try and facilitate the use of the parks and the various ball diamonds and the soccer fields, et cetera, et cetera. And it worked well. There was good interplay. Unfortunately, it did fall off to the side, but we can deal with that when the time comes. I see this as really an important and integral part of the operation of that facility, for the smooth operation of that facility. So I'll see whether any other councillors want to comment on that. I do have a couple of small points that I'd like to also bring up as well.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Kersey. Councillor Durley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There definitely is a need for this because, as staff indicated, there's a growing demand for court time. There's growing demand for everything as new programs come on board, and nobody is more familiar with the workings of the programs in the facility than our staff. If pickleball wants to work with where badminton may be, certainly there has to be some interplay and some interconnection there. Every group has tournaments. Actually, I believe there's old-timer tournaments as well, and the old-timers only have a few hours of ice time, but there is a time where they're going to have greater need. And at that particular time, a minor hockey or the junior team may be out of town, so that there will be ice time available. So all of this thing, and this is where my first thought in my notice of motion was communication and being able to work things out. And I think being at the table is the only way that these people can communicate. First of all, their needs. Secondly, be able to cooperate with each other to make everybody work successfully.
Thank you.
Excuse me.
Mr. Mayor, I think you were...
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Certainly agree wholeheartedly with Councillor Durling on the rationale for the committee. I guess a couple questions come to mind. If there's new licensees or leasees, would they be added to the committee? So Councillor Durling mentioned pickleball. I know they may well want to sign a long-term contract. Would they be added to the committee? Something to think about. It says here that it's user groups and those that are licensed, but it also includes service clubs, and rightly so there might be a little bit of a conflict there. First point, effective communication between user groups, etc. So I think that's important. I think for this one, council may want to consider adding a youth representative. Member of the Mayor's Youth Advisory Council. So again, it would be a youth member, or maybe as an ad hoc, as needed basis, or every so often. I don't know, but we want to make sure that we get the youth involved. I don't know how that might be done, but I think it would be important. We heard earlier the importance of youth on this. Now, if it's only going to be sort of an allocation thing, but this amount of ice and that amount of ice and all of that. But if it's much more than that, if it's here's what we're planning, here's the youth, etc.
So,
Unless I have the wrong idea for the youth council or for the committee.
So, Mr. Mayor, you're suggesting that there be some changes to the terms of reference to include or to specify something with regard to a number of these groups. For example, the addition of a youth, a representative of youth, that's not in here currently, so that would be an amendment?
I'd like to hear if that would work, if with the committee, or is that not the idea of the committee? I'm seeing the CEO shake his head, so.
I think Councillor King had something on this point.
Well, I'm just looking at a member representing community service clubs, and while you're mentioning youth, I'm thinking of the seniors. And maybe answering my own question, the seniors might be represented by a service club, but within any of those service clubs, would the youth be represented to address your concern?
Well, they are many of them are predominantly youth groups. Okay. So if the Mayor's Youth Advisory, for example, wants to organize a weekend-long event, whatever that is, and there's a conflict, they would come to this committee and say, by the way, this is what we'd like to do. The committee would say, well, we can move this around and do this to accommodate. Is that how it would work?
I don't know, but just to pick up on your hypothetical, presumably if they or any other group wanted to book a part of the MCC for an event, they would go through a booking process, wouldn't they?
Yep. Okay,
Rather
that's fine.
than go into.
So Councillor King's answered it and you've answered it. That's good.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor.
So then the final thing is, we do call it an activity center. The terms of reference say gym.
Yeah,
Maybe that should be adjusted. Thanks.
That's an amendment that'll happen. Councillor King, did you have anything further?
No, Mr. Chair, I'm finished.
Councillor Durley?
My points were given by the thoughts, the comments that were made earlier, but again, there would be 1 or 2 times a year that a youth group might be, and I'll ask through youth to staff, would youth be a regular request for space in the building, or would it be just from time to time? Or what is anticipated? And if I could, through you, direct it to the Director of Recreation.
By all means. Madam Director.
Mr. Chair, the Mayor's Youth Advisory Council is part of the staff. We have a staff member that sits on, leads the Mayor's Youth Advisory Council. So we also have a staff member, it's recommended, on this committee. So that staff member would represent the Mayor's Youth Advisory Council on this committee.
Okay. So just for clarification, and through you, Mr. Chair, if I can, then the programming that you people do would certainly answer the needs to all of these groups then?
That's true.
Perfect,
Because we
okay.
also have a staff member that works with the Senior Advisory Committee.
That's correct. Perfect.
That fits right in. Thank you.
Other comments? Councillor Kersey?
Well, Mr. Chair, I had similar concerns. I wrote down we need to have some representation of the non-licensed users because they're going to be a relatively large group, but they're not necessarily highly organized. I think of the fact that this building has been named as a seniors active living center, but if our Director of Recreation, Culture, and Wellness feels that the representative of her department on the committee would recommend or would represent that group, the ARC committee group, the MIAC group, if she's comfortable with that, I'll defer to that. And I just think the non-licensed users need to have some representation. If that's accomplished by the RCW staff rep, then I'm happy with that.
So if I may, let me add my comments to all of yours. I too saw this as an ongoing committee whose need will probably arise at least monthly. So the idea that you would have a monthly communication exercise where people can put their issues on the table and deal with them in an orderly way, I think is, and doing that right from the outset is a tremendous plus, because I can see, given by the density of the scheduling, that there are going to be those issues that arise. I certainly saw that the membership of the proposed advisory committee, being the licensed users and including in those our staff, meant that those who are looking at the schedule and dealing with scheduling issues have the opportunity. So if anyone comes along with a one-off or an infrequent event, it will be represented on that committee because staff will be there to bring the applications forward and to fit them in. But I can see that the real need is around, how to distribute a very scarce resource amongst an awful lot of users, as it's turning out very quickly to be. So completely unlike the other committee, which I thought was an ad hoc committee, this one I absolutely agree is going to go on continuously, and its problems or the issues with which it will concern itself will not go away anytime in the any time period. If people are doing this thing, people are going to have problems. So I think we talked about amending the word gym somewhere in this thing, and I couldn't locate exactly where you have that. The question of youth, I think, has been answered. New licensees, I think the terms of reference indicate that all the licensees need a representative there. So if there's a new licensee, then by definition, it would have a member there. Service clubs, a representative from service clubs. I think, Mr. Mayor, you indicated that there's the potential for some issue because they have to agree amongst themselves who their one representative is going to be.
Okay.
They'll figure it out. They're all adults. They'll work it out. So those are my comments. I think this is excellent. Are there any other comments before we call the question? So calling the question, yeah, I'm sorry, Councillor Pat?
Just as a matter of a general question, once we pass both these groups, just so I'm clear, do I understand, Mr. Mayor and Madam Clerk, Mr. CEO, we will be going out to advertise, subject to council approval on October the 1st? Is that what's going to be the next steps?
What's the next step after we approve these next meeting at council?
Well, they become committees of council, and then they're appointed through the process that
Through
comes.
the public process, right?
That's correct. That's my understanding of
So
what.
that's what will
Advertising
happen.
will occur?
Yeah.
Just for clarity through you, Mr. Chair, advertising now or with the new
That's what I'm
council?
asking.
That would be our choice, wouldn't it? wouldn't it? And we may choose to say, you know what, we'll pass this, but leave it till the next council because it may not work. But I think that that's part of a discussion we can, I mean, do you want to have that now, or do you want to have that
No,
at
I
the
just,
council
I want to be
meeting?
clear on that.
No, Councilor Durley, I know has.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we have two separate animals here. The facilities group, or the hospitality group, we're looking at some experts that are members of the public. So there is the application process. In this user group, it is a completely different animal in the fact that these people are already on board, and we ask each one of these groups to appoint one person to be the representatives. I think they're two different applications. So, and again, one being revenue providing, the other being operational sanity, if you will. So, I think we're different with both.
The Operational Sanity Advisory Committee.
So,
So in fact, the process for appointing
Yes.
public is one thing, appointing this is another thing, because in fact, these people are already licensed user groups. People that'll be coming in under the hospitality thing are not licensed user groups, they're members of the public, and the application process is there by bylaw in the, if I'm correct, and Madam Clerk,
let's
correct
ask-
me if I'm wrong.
Let's ask Madam Clerk, you were talking about membership having to be residents of Pelham. I'm assuming that not all of the licensed groups necessarily are, all of their members are residents of Pelham. If they choose to be represented by someone who's not, is that still a legitimate?
Mr. Chair, the point that I'm trying to make is that the user groups are already members of the MCC.
Yes.
So in fact, we're not applying to the public for an appointment there. What we're doing is asking the junior Bs to appoint a person to represent them, the admirals to have, so these people are already there. We're looking for an appointment from within.
Yes.
With the hospitality, we're looking for appointments from without, people that are experts in the field. These people have their own experts. We don't have to look outside for the experts. These are the people that we're sitting at the table. So we have two different applications, if you will.
Councilor Durley, thank you for that, and I appreciate it. I still would like an answer to my question, which is how bound is this committee to have people only from the town of Pelham if, in fact, people who are involved in the activity may not be? They may be, for example, somebody in Welland may be on the board of one of these user groups.
Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it. They don't need, what does it matter whether they're a resident or not? They're using the facility. They're working or they're volunteering within the community for the community.
I know that, Councillor King, but we were just read a bylaw that said that these are restricted to certain people. So I just wanted to know that question, but I fully agree with you. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, let it be.
Well, thank you. Yeah, let it be.
Let it be. Let it be. Shall we call the question?
Please do.
The committee recommend the council approve the Meridian Community Center User Group Roundtable Committee terms of reference. In favor? Passed.
As amended.
As amended. As amended.
appoint these people in a chair on October 1st. Is that good?
What's the next point? The next one is,
What's that?
okay, 4.3. Moved by Councillor Lane that the Policy and Priorities Committee recommend to Council.
Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Papp. Recommend to Council that the information provided by the Community Planning and Development Department outlining the consultation process that will be undertaken regarding changes to the zoning bylaw, official plan, and licensing bylaw relating to bed and breakfast and vacation rental establishments be received. Questions, comments? Councillor Durley.
This one perhaps, excuse me, a typo. To date, list includes lookout residents group, concerned residents of Pelham in bracket CPR, although they may need CPR from time to time. It might be CRP is maybe the proper terminology.
CRP. You've got that, I think. Great. Others? Councillor Kersey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to the director. Are we anticipating 1 or 2 or 3 public meetings in advance of the statutory public meeting and over and above meeting with the individual identified groups? So there may be people in the community that have not affiliated themselves with groups, but yet might not like to make a declaration or an appearance at a public meeting.
Yes, Mr. Chair, through
Madam
you, I
Director.
do anticipate that there would be some type of open house that would be open to broadly to the public, so that we can have all of that input prior to the formal statutory public meeting. At least one, and again, it's gonna, the process is a bit fluid. It will depend on the type of feedback that we get. If we need to go back a second time and a third time, we will, but, you know, there would be at least one.
I think the motion, Madam Director, that was made, or the direction was that we would hold the call them an information meeting or an open house in multiple areas in the community. So I'm thinking at least one in Fenwick and one in Fonthill.
Yep, we can certainly do that.
That would just,
We can certainly do that.
thank you.
Councillor King.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I know that the information that's contained in this memo has satisfied all of the questions and concerns of the community group. And when I say community group, it does include residents not directly in the affected area, but throughout town. So all in all, I think that the process that's outlined here is satisfactory out there.
Others? Mr. Mayor?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Perhaps we can add what Ms. Ween said about going out with having open houses to it. I think it'd be helpful. I think that this, for a lot of people, it's a very important issue. And I think, you know, we should make this available, and then when approved by council, perhaps get it out to the community as well. This is the process. I received an email, a copy of an email, I think, to one member of council who, and the people were, you know, hoping that, wondering when the meetings were. So this would help understand when the meetings are, when they're going to be planned, what the work schedule is, et cetera.
Thank you. I think I detected a signal from Madam Director that she would include that in the memo.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'll certainly add the requirement for the open house to this memo, and then we can release it for final approval to on council next
Couple of weeks.
October 1st.
Okay, thank you.
Terrific. Other comments?
Appreciate the update.
Yeah, and yeah, I think it works as well. So let me call the question. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. I don't think there's any old business, so we have an adjournment. So moved by Councillor Kersey that this regular meeting of committee be adjourned until the next regular meeting scheduled for October 1st, 2018, following council. Favor? Passed. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.